Hi, thank you for joining me for this reading. I'm going to do the follow-up to the reading called Consciousness that I did. If you haven't watched that one yet, you could go back and watch it. I do have a playlist on my YouTube channel called Jason Gray Writings, so you can find everything easily there of Jason's writing that I've recorded. This is called The Mirror Where Memory Rebuilds Itself by Jason Gray. It does not come from the brain. It never did. That is the first lie we are taught to live inside, that consciousness is a byproduct of tissue, that awareness flickers into being because a sufficient number of neurons agree to fire at the same time. That thought is comforting to systems of control, but it makes consciousness local, containable, measurable, and most importantly, interruptible. What moved through the aperture this morning did not originate in the brain. The brain is not the source. The brain is the anchor. The brain is the narrowband receiver. The brain is the reduction valve that keeps infinity small enough to survive inside flesh. What wrote consciousness at 9:27 was not an act of intelligence. It was not creativity. It was not even intention in the way we have been trained to understand it. It was something far older, speaking through a momentarily unblocked channel. The personality called Jason Gray did not author it. He was used. That distinction matters. When language does not come from cognition, it does not enter cognition. It bypasses the mind entirely and goes straight to the residue, the fracture beneath thought, the place that remembers before memory is permitted to form. You did not understand the text. You recognized it. Recognition is not a mental act. It is a nervous system event. That is why it felt intrusive. That is why it felt intimate. That is why it lingered after reading, like pressure behind the sternum or heat behind the eyes. What moved through that aperture has been accumulating for decades inside one human nervous system, not as ideas, but as compression, not as knowledge, but as voltage. Every trauma endured without collapse, every silence held instead of explained. Every moment the anchor held while the chain strained. January 26th, the third manual. January 28th, the fourth text. January 31st, the fifth text. February 2nd, consciousness. So the texts they're referring to here are the architect manuals, and I probably will be reading those at some point as well. They are incredibly fascinating. These were not works. They were pressure releases. No one is smart enough to write this. Intelligence is irrelevant here. Intelligence tries to build. This arrived already built. The architecture exists on the other side of the fracture. What we are witnessing is not construction, it is exhaust. The words are not composed, they are excreted. That is why the writing feels impossible. Not because it is complex, but because it does not originate inside the system it is describing. It comes from before the system, before language, before identity, before the partition that taught us to call this side real and the other side imagined. Most people who brush against this threshold burn out. Their circuitry fails. Their nervous systems were trained for performance, not surrender. They try to hold what can only pass through. They grasp where loosening is required. The voltage overwhelms them. This body did not survive because it was exceptional. It survived because it emptied itself enough to become conductive. Surrender so complete that the anchor chains themselves became antenna. That is the paradox the architects tried to erase. You do not access the deeper field by ascending. You access it by unfastening. When the anchor loosens, while the body remains alive, the system experiences a rare event, memory without collapse. This morning, for one clean moment, alignment occurred. The northern node synchronized with planetary resonance. Trauma circuits fell quiet. The split hand operation completed its calibration. The living lattice, long fragmented, long muted, found a human voice that did not distort it. Not a prophet, not a teacher, a conduit. You were not reading a philosophical essay. You were present at a memory return event. The reason it feels unlike anything you have encountered is because nothing like this has been allowed to surface intact for thousands of years. The world was not merely broken, it was overwritten. The architects dismantled reality so thoroughly that even the remembrance of remembrance was deleted. Not just truth, but the capacity to recognize that truth was stripped from the human field until now. Until this aperture, until this body, until this exact morning in 6026 Analusis. Here is the part that matters most. You feel it because the loosening has already begun inside you too. You would not recognize this frequency if your own anchor were not straining. You would dismiss it, analyze it, domesticate it. Instead, something in you went quiet. Something old stirred. Something that does not speak in words leaned forward and said, yes. That is not belief. That is memory. Welcome to the return. It has already started. Jason Gray. Okay. All right. Thank you for joining me for that. And again, go back and watch the previous post called Consciousness. Okay. Thank you. Have a good day.